welcome back to the channel, family, and another broadcast. I'm really pleased to be joined by Anthony.
Yes, welcome, family. My name's Anthony. I'm a grateful recovered drug addict, grateful member of Cocaine Anonymous, and I'm actually zooming in from Bristol today to do this podcast with my fellow member, Paul.
Yeah, recovered addict Peter Head. So we are doing a series broadcast on the 12 traditions. Today is tradition 2, so please check out the previous podcast on tradition 1. If you're struggling with drug addiction, please check out the broadcasts on each of the 12 steps. We'll be putting up information about how to attend meetings on this broadcast, so please look out for that. Bear in mind you can pause and rewind this at any point. Please feel free to reach out and get involved in the conversation if you'd like to correct us or add anything to our discussion in the chat where you see this posted. So without further ado, Anthony, last week we discussed tradition 1, and I really enjoyed hearing what you had to say about that. Today it is tradition 2. And I quite like this sort of illustrated guide to 12 steps. I think it's really good. If I enlarge that, are you happy to read that?
Most certainly. Okay, my name's Anthony. I'm a addict, recovered. AA is both a democracy, in Bill W.'s words, a benign anarchy, a group of elects in its own officers who have no power or order anybody or do anything. In most groups, most of the slate rotates out of office at the end of 6 months and new officers are elected. If a group wants to be part of a whole AA service structure, it elects a GSR, General Service Representative, with a 2-year term. GSRs elect area committee members and then join them in electing delegate from their area to the annual General Service Conference. The conference is about the closest approximation of a government that AA has. It produces opinions in important matters of policy. It approves the choice of some trustee nominees for the General Service Board and directly elects others. But neither the conference nor the board can give orders to any group or member. Then who is in charge around here? AA is a spiritual movement. And so the ultimate authority is a spiritual concept of the group conscience. Its voice is heard when a well-informed group gathers to arrive at a decision. The results rests on more than arithmetic and yes and no count. Minority ideas get thoughtful attention. What about that annoying character who always sure she's right? If she's wrong, then she will, if she remembers the first tradition as well as the second, go along with the decision of the group conscience. Does this notion seem too cloudy? Let's think back to the first meetings. The presence we newcomers felt in those rooms was the same as the group conscience, and it was real, welcoming us in, setting up no barriers of rules.
That's great. Thank you, Anthony. And just put the graphic up for a second so people get the general idea. Yeah, so I'm going to put up on the screen, we're going to be using the book today to all the 12 traditions, the 12 steps and 12 traditions. You can read or download this book completely free. You can read or listen to it anytime at aa.org. You can also download it as a free app from the Google Play Store. So I'm going to go ahead and put that up on screen right now. Do you want to just briefly lead us in, Anthony, whilst I get that on screen for us, mate?
Okay, yeah, I'll just give us a bit of a summary. The 12 traditions of the 12-step program provides guidelines for relationships between the 12-step groups, members, other groups, the global fellowship, and the society at large. Questions of finance, public relations, donations, and purpose are addressed in the traditions. They were originally written by Bill Wilson after the founding of the first 12-step group, Alcoholics Anonymous. Several of the tenets of what was to become AA's 12 traditions were first expressed in a foreword to the first edition of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous in 1939. By 1944, the number of AA groups had grown along with the number of letters being sent to the AA headquarters in New York. asking how to handle disputes caused by issues like the publicity, religion and finances. By 1946, AA co-founder Bill Wilson had more clearly formulated the basic ideas of the 12 traditions directly from such correspondence with groups via the group conscience method, setting guidelines on how groups and members should interact with each other, the public and AA as a whole. The traditions were first published in April 1936, AA Grapevine, under the title of 12 Points to Assure Our Future, and were formally adopted at AA's first international conference in 1950. Wilson book on the subject of the 12 steps, 12 traditions was published in April 1953. Right, over to you, Paul.
Right, okay, lovely. So, and of course, the traditions are to the group what the steps are to the individual. It has been said that the steps are to help the individual not commit suicide, and the traditions are help us to not commit homicide. So the traditions are for the health and well-being of the group. And I'm going to go ahead and read a page, and I wondered if we could go back and forth roughly a page each, Anthony, for our listeners. But before I do that, I just want to very briefly mention the continuity when working steps, traditions or concepts is very important. Tradition 1 is a statement: our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon CA unity. Tradition 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they doth not govern. Where does AA, CA, NA get its direction? Who runs it? This too is a puzzler for every friend and newcomer. When told that our society has no president having authority to govern it, no treasurer who can compel the payment of any dues, no board of directors who can cast an erring member into outer darkness, when indeed no AA can give another a directive and enforce obedience. Our friends gasp and exclaim, this simply cannot be. There must be an angle somewhere. These practical folk then read tradition 2 and learn that the sole authority in AA or CA or NA is a loving God, as he may express himself in the group conscience. They dubiously ask an experienced AA member if this really works. The member, saying to all appearances, immediately answers, oh yes, it definitely does. The friends mutter that this looks vague, nebulous, and pretty naive to them. Then they commence to watch us with speculative eyes. They pick up a fragment of AA history and soon have the solid facts. What are these facts of AA life which brought us to this apparently impractical principle? Over to you, Anthony.
Okay, yep, John Doe, a good AA moves, let us say, to Middletown, USA. Alone now, he reflects that he may not be able to stay sober or even alive unless he passes on to other alcoholics what was so freely given him. He feels a spiritual and ethical compulsion because hundreds may be suffering within reach of his help. Then too, he misses his home group. He needs other alcoholics as much as they need him. He visits preachers, doctors, editors, policemen, and bartenders, with the result that Middletown now has a group, and he is the founder. Being the founder, he is at first the boss. Who else could be? Very soon, though, he assumed authority to run. Everything begins to be shared with the first alcoholics he has helped. At this moment, the benign dictator becomes the chairman of a committee composed of his friends. These are the growing group's hierarchy of service. Self-appointed, of course, because there is no other way. In a matter of months, AA booms in Middletown. The founder and his friends channel spirituality to newcomers, hire halls, make hospital arrangements, and entreat their wives to brew gallons of coffee. Being on the human side, the founder and his friends may bask a little in glory, then say to one another, perhaps it would be a good idea if we continue to keep a firm hand on AA in this town. After all, we are experienced. Besides, look at all the good we've done these drunks. They should be grateful. True. Founders and their friends are sometimes wiser and more humble than this. But more often, at this stage, they are not. Growing pains now beset the group. Panhandlers panhandle. Lonely hearts pine. Problems descend like an avalanche. Still more important murmurs are heard in the body politic, which swell into a loud cry. Do these old timers think they can run this group forever? Let's have an election. The founder and his friends are hurt and depressed. They rush from crisis to crisis and from member to member, pleading, but it's no use. The revolution is on. The group conscience is about to take over. Over to you, Paul.
Beautiful. Now comes the election. If the founder and his friends have served well, they may, to their surprise, be reinstated for a time. If, however, they have heavily resisted the rising tide of democracy, they may be summarily beached. In either case, the group now has a so-called rotating committee, very sharply limited in its authority. In no sense whatever can its members govern or direct the group. They are servants. Theirs is a sometimes thankless privilege of doing the group's chores. Headed by the chairman, they look after public relations and arrange meetings. Their treasurer, strictly accountable, takes money from the hat that is passed, banks it, pays the rent and other bills, then makes a regular report at business meetings. The secretary sees that literature is on the table, looks after the phone answering service, answers the mail, and sends out notices of meetings. Such are the simple services that enable the group to function. The committee gives no spiritual advice, judges no one's conduct, issues no orders. Every one of them may be promptly eliminated at the next election if they try this. And so they make the belated discovery that they are really servants, not senators. These are universal experiences. Thus, throughout AA does the group conscience decree the terms upon which its leaders shall serve.
This brings us straight to the question, does AA have a real leadership? Most emphatically, the answer is yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there you go.
Notwithstanding the apparent lack of it, let's turn again to the disposed founder and his friends. What becomes of them? As their grief and anxiety wear away, a subtle change begins. Ultimately, they divide into two classes known as AA slang as the elder statesman and the bleeding deacons. The elder statesman is one who sees the wisdom of the group decision, who holds no resentment over his reduced status, whose judgment, fortified by considerable experience, is sound, and who is willing to sit quietly on the sidelines, patiently awaiting developments. The bleeding deacon is one who is just as surely convinced that the group cannot get along without him, who constantly connives for re-election to office, and who continues to be consumed with self-pity. A few hemorrhage so badly that, drained of all AA spirit and principle, they get drunk. At times, the AA landscape seems to be littered with bleeding forms. Nearly every old timer in our society has gone through this process to some degree. Happily, most of them survive and live to become elder statesmen. They become the real and permanent leadership of AA. Theirs is the quiet opinion, the sure knowledge and humble example that resolves a crisis. When sorely perplexed, the group inevitably turns to them for advice. They become the voice of the group conscience. In fact, these are the true voice of Alcoholics Anonymous. They do not drive by mandate, they lead by example. This is the experience which has led us to the conclusion that our group conscience, well advised by its elder, will be in the long run wiser than any single leader.
Beautiful. When AA was only 3 years old, an event occurred demonstrating this principle. One of the first members of AA, entirely contrary to his own desires, was obliged to conform to group opinion. Here's the story in his own words. One day I was doing a 12-step job at a hospital in New York. The proprietor, Charlie, summoned me to his office. "Bill," he said, "I think it's a shame that you are financially so hard up. All around you, these drunks are getting well and making money, but you're giving this work full time and you're broke. It isn't fair." Charlie fished in his desk and came up with an old financial statement. Handing it to me, he continued, "This shows the kind of money the hospital used to make back in the 1920s. Thousands of dollars a month. It should be doing just as well now, and it would, if only you'd help me. So why don't you move your work in here? I'll give you an office, a decent drawing account, and a very healthy slice of the profits." 3 years ago, when my head doctor, Silkworth, began to tell me of the idea of helping drunks by spirituality, I thought it was crackpot stuff, but I've changed my mind. Someday this bunch of ex-drunks of yours will fill Madison Square Garden, and I don't see why you should starve meanwhile. What I propose is perfectly ethical. You can become a lay therapist and more successful than anybody in the business. I was bowled over. There were a few twinges of conscience until I saw how really ethical Charlie's proposal was. There was nothing wrong whatever with becoming a lay therapist. I thought of Lois coming home exhausted from the department store each day, only to cook supper for a house full of drunks who weren't paying board. I thought of the large sum of money still owing my Wall Street creditors. I thought of a few of my alcoholic friends who were making as much money as ever. Why shouldn't I do as well as they?
Although I asked Charlie for a little time to consider it, my own mind was made up. I made my own mind up about it. Racing back to Brooklyn on the subway, I had a seeming flash of divine guidance. It was only a single sentence, but most convincing. In fact, it came right out of the Bible. A voice kept saying to me, "The labourer's worth is higher." Arriving home, I found Lois cooking as usual, while three drunks looked hungrily on from the kitchen door. I drew her aside and told the glorious news. She looked interested, but not as excited as I thought she would be. It was meeting night. Although none of the alcoholics we boarded seemed to get sober, some others had. With their wives, they crowded into our downstairs parlour. At once, I burst into the story of my opportunity. Never shall I forget their impassive faces and the steady gaze they focused upon me. With waning enthusiasm, my tale trailed off to the end. There was a silence. Almost timidly, one of my friends began to speak. "We know how hard up you are, Bill. It bothers us a lot. We've often wondered what we might do about it. But I think I speak for everyone here when I say what you now propose bothers us an awful lot more." The speaker's voice grew more confident. "Don't you realize," he went on, "that you can never become a professional? As generous as Charlie has been to us, don't you see that we can't tie this thing up with the hospital or any other? You tell us that," move the page, yeah, "Charlie's proposal is ethical." Sure, it's ethical, but what we've got won't run on ethics only. It has to be better. Sure, Charlie's idea is good, but it isn't good enough. This is a matter of life and death, Bill, and nothing but the very best will do. Challengingly, my friends looked at me as their spokesman continued. "Bill, haven't you often said right here in this meeting that sometimes the good is the enemy of the best? Well, this is a plain case of it. You can't do this thing to us." Over to you, Paul.
Yeah, beautiful. So spoke the group conscience. The group was right and I was wrong. The voice on the subway was not the voice of God. Here was the true voice welling up out of my friends. I listened and thank God I obeyed. Very, very strong reading. And it's interesting that he also touched on one of the other traditions about not affiliated, no opinion on outside issues and not affiliated. And we are, fully self-supporting, fully autonomous, not affiliated, with no opinion on outside issues, and with one primary purpose: to carry a message to the still suffering addict. And we do that by recognizing that our common welfare comes first, because the individual's recovery depends upon the unity, pardon me, Anthony, of the meeting, of the gathering, of the group. And and that depends upon a loving God. And I think the first point I'd like to make to start us off, Anthony, and I shall go back to our lovely graphic if it's still there. It is the idea. You see, I'm conscious that a lot of our listeners, Anthony, will be new to the traditions, and you know the reality is that newcomers come along to meetings and they enjoy the spiritual atmosphere, and they don't realise that that spiritual atmosphere is there because for years other members have been forming a healthy and mature group conscience in order to provide, you know, an amicable, suitable spiritual atmosphere that promotes recovery, if you know what I mean. And so it's very interesting that this tradition has in view the group. Just one moment. Pardon me. It's very interesting that this tradition has in view the group. Now, the thing is, you know, the steps, anyone's welcome. There's something of a disturbing trend, I would say, in modern 12-step recovery where, oh, don't mention God. Oh, well, I'm sorry, but the steps clearly talk about the Creator. You know, step 11, Anthony, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry it out. Clearly has in view an all-knowing, all-powerful, unseen Creator. There's no question in it. To try and deceive people it doesn't is wrong. And tradition too is very similar. There it is, and that's what we're looking at today. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as He may express Himself in our group conscience. Elizabeth, trust and service, they do not govern. So I think what's in view is the bigger picture and the health of the individual as a result of the health of the group. And I'll let you back in with this statement, Anthony. You know, the centrality and authority and obedience to the voice of God seems to be what the health of the group is based on.
Beautiful, beautiful. I agree, absolutely. You know, these traditions, you know, the provided guidelines. Now, these traditions can be adhered to not just in our fellowship, which they, you know, really pertinently need to be adhered to, because they deflate the ego, they create diversity and equality. You know, as it says in the tradition, for our group purpose, there's one ultimate authority, a loving God as He may express Himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. And it takes us, you know, these principles can be used in finance, public relations, donations, purpose, addressed, you know, for the groups, for the members, you know, to other groups. And by adhering to these principles, I mean, if you look what Bill Wilson said, you know, he was there, he got offered a job as a lay therapist, you know, and then, you know, because it's about keeping everybody right size. There's this illustration actually shows us as well in an animated version. And, you know, he offered him the job and then he thought he heard that voice, you know, that's what it said to him. The labourer is worthy of his hire, but all he was thinking about himself. He weren't thinking about the group. And then, you know, when he got back and what they actually said to him, you know, that you can't do this, you know, and the group conscience spoke, and he knew then that he'd heard the right voice. You know, he knew. He said, what does it say? It says, then who's in charge around here? AA is a spiritual movement, and so the ultimate authority is a spiritual concept of a group conscience. Its voice is heard when a well-informed group gathers to arrive at a decision. The results rests on more than an arithmetic and yes and no count. Minority ideas get thoughtful attention. So no, when you're in the group conscience, this is for the newcomer as well. You know, we might be a bit bemused we're talking about this, but the unity, service and recovery, unity, service, you know, it's very pertinent that the group is there as a whole to make sure, because world feeds the area feeds the districts, and the districts feeds the groups, and the groups feed to make sure that the threshold is open to give the newcomer or someone who's fortunate enough to get back from a relapse or a backslider, you know, the opportunity to come back in and have a spiritual experience. you know, and that's what this is vitally all about. You know, it's pertinent. And as the group, you know, as a whole, it talks about the bleeding deacon and the old timer. You know, so, you know, by adhering to the guidelines and these traditions as a group, we start learning. Because what happens is the ego, we all wrestle with ego. We all wrestle with pride, and that's a daily thing. And, you know, but by listening and adhering to, when we got sponsorship, you know, we get into meetings, we got the home group, and we start adhering to these principles and realizing for our group purpose, there's one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself, in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. And as Paul rightly said earlier, the steps stop us from killing ourselves as individuals, and the traditions stop us from killing each other. So it creates a diversity and equality, keeps people right-sized, and really realizing what our singleness of purpose is. And that is for, you know, each group's primary purpose is to carry the message to the addict who still suffers. So we have to make sure, you know, we touched on tradition 1 on our last podcast. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon CA unity. You know, for this one is our group, for our group purposes, one ultimate authority. And I think God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. So when we have a group conscience, you know, we can come up with some ideas what we'd like to put forward for the group, you know, and then the group will vote on that, for, against, or an abstention, you know, and the group as a whole will talk. God will talk through the group for his will to be done, you know, and as Paul rightly said, all the principles and the tenets all, you know, kind of intertwine into each other. So the more we're going on, and, you know, and you start listening to this podcast, picking up your 12 and 12, reading it, you know, and you will start, you know, realizing, you know, it's like the guy at Middletown, you know, being a founder, he'd moved to a new town, he started a new meeting, but he needed the people to create the group. And then once the group was created, you know, some people start thinking that, you know, the ego reconstructs, and they start thinking it's all about them, but it's not. It's about a rotation of spirit, a spirit of rotation, and it's about everybody as individuals collaboratively, you know, coming together and keeping the group open and doing God's will. I'll pass it back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah. Yeah, so I was thinking about the importance and the preeminence of God in recovery and in the group, Anthony. That's what's in view here, and there is a correlation between the ordering of the steps and the traditions and the concepts. And in tradition 2, the preeminence of God and the authority of God and the sovereignty of God is what gives the health of the group. In step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. You know, and clearly it's God's grace and power that does that for the individual and for the group, even for individuals that don't understand that yet. And there's a lot of them, you know, and I think, you know, that the authority of God is what's essential. You know, you mentioned, and, you know, I was going to go on to the GC, the group conscience, in a little while. That's like the latter part of the tradition. You know, I mean, you know, God carries the group. You know, it says in the concepts, Anthony, that each group is a spiritual entity that exists before God. So God is overseeing thousands, tens of thousands of AA, NA, and CA groups right now. And when human beings pop along to a meeting, they are experiencing the grace of God that's already been active for some time in that group, forming a healthy and mature current group conscience. You know, are you involved in any group consciences at the moment, Anthony?
At the moment, I'm involved with one group. I do believe that, as you rightly touched on, that, you know, step 2, tradition 2, concept 2 is the cornerstones of the infrastructure of the 36 principles. You know, and I believe that, you know, one addict reaching out to the other is one beggar reaching out to the other, and someone who's a bit further on is the half blind leading the blind. But we need these guidelines. As you rightly said, God is sovereign, God is supreme, you know, God is superior, and God is the main thread through the steps, the traditions, and the concepts, because we need God to be able to spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection, as it talks about. But it's the half blind leading the blind. But we need these guidelines because we're only human, and we got, you know, traits self-manifested into various ways, you know, and all that stuff. That selfish and self-centeredness is the root of the trouble. So we have to get out of self, and by adhering to these principles and traditions, you know, we start learning how to get out of self and think about the group as a collaborative group, you know, the infrastructure and the scaffolding of the fellowship.
Yes. Yes, and it's quite interesting, and we'll get to later traditions in the coming weeks. But it's very interesting that, you know, the autonomy of the group is essential, and the greater good is in view, isn't it? And the commonality of the group, because the unity of the group is the very thing that will be helpful to the newcomer that's going to come to the group next week, next month, and next year. You know, and I suppose we can come to the group conscience. I mean, you know, I've been in many face-to-face and online group consciences over the years, Anthony, and it's very important that a group conscience is stable and follows simple principles, just like a meeting does. I mean, you and I attend meetings, Anthony. They almost always they always have an introduction, they always have the preamble, they always have a reading, and then they have the format of the meeting. Then you have the body of the meeting, then you have some more readings, then you have a prayer, and it's the end of the meeting. You always get that format. It might fluctuate slightly from meeting to meeting, but you always get that. And I believe it's the same in a group conscience, Anthony. You go along to a group conscience, you should get a similar format. Someone perhaps prays, introduces the meeting, sometimes the traditions are read. Then you have all business, which is anything that was tabled from the last group conscience, and in this order. And then you have new business, which is anything that's come up from the last GC to the new one, that's already been brought to the attention of the whoever's chairing the group conscience, which has to be someone that's familiar with the traditions and the existing group conscience and how group consciences are chaired. You deal then with new business. And then once new business be dealt with, then you have open floor, which is for anything that anyone wants to bring at that group conscience. Every member has a voice and every member has a vote. Some things, Anthony, require simply a 50% plus majority. Other things that are procedural that affect officers need a 2/3 plus majority. You know, some groups will have extra bits in there where you can count the abstentions, people that abstain to the yes votes. The group that I help out with, we find that very, very complex. We're not deciding the fate of nuclear nations. You know, a yes is a yes and a no is a no. You know, so that's how we do it, Anthony, and I've done it for quite some time, and that keeps it very, very, very simple, because you will always get that experience, just like in a regular meeting. And that gives stability and serenity. Everyone gets a voice, everyone gets a vote, anyone can make a motion, right? If a motion is seconded, it will be going to a vote, you know, and once it's been seconded, you allow a maximum of 3 pros and 3 cons lasting a couple of minutes each, and then it goes to a vote, you know, and if it's passed, it's immediately brought in. At the next group conscience, it can be voted down and changed, you know, and that way autonomy, common welfare, the equality of the membership is upheld, Anthony. And, you know, in my experience, everyone's usually happy with that when they realise the democracy. You know, everyone's very happy with that. So what's been your experience around actual group consciences you've been in?
Okay, yeah, you know, the only requirement for membership is a desire, as you rightly said. My experience on group consciences have been okay. You know, I do believe that you know, I've come across bleeding deacons and I've come across old timers, and as it says on page 135, it says they become. So it says there is a quiet opinion The sure knowledge and humble example that resolves a crisis where sorely perplexed, the group inevitably turn to them for advice. They become the voice of the group conscience. In fact, these are the true voice of Cocaine Anonymous. They do not drive by mandate, they lead by example. This is the experience which has led us to the conclusion that our group conscience, well advised by its elders, will be, in the long run, wiser than any single leader. So, you know, this is why Bill Wilson, you know, and Robert Aldrich Smith, this is why these traditions were actually put in place. You know, it was trial and error, trial and error, trial and error, you know, because there was a lot of people coming in, they wanted money to donate money just to get involved so they could have a say and control. Fear, thought they was in lack, thought the grass was greener on the other side. There was people that wanted to come in and make money out of it, as we just kind of read. Bill Wilson as an example, you know, he's used his own example from his own experience there, you know, so they had to be put in place, and then they led by example, not by mandate, you know, and that's what it had to be adhered to, and you know, that's where we have to adhere to these traditions. From my own experience, I've been in group consciences. I've stayed at the group level, if I'm honest. At the moment, I've stayed at group level, and I've been in group consciences where, you know, some people have tried to kind of, with their ego, dominate the group, and you know, and come up with a few ideas, and the group have had to collaboratively, you know, go against it, you know, and or there's been other groups where there's been old timers in there, and they've just been leading by example, very humble. You know, some of the best shares are done over a tea towel. They're not worried about getting the GSR or the literature post, or, you know, they're quite humble enough to take a washing up post, you know. So I've kind of learned from watching old timers and watching other people, and I do believe that it is a learning process, obviously, but by learning this and realizing for our good consciences, one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself, and our good conscience, our leaders, but trusty servants, they do not govern. But these principles, when they, you know, you can go a bit, it touched on it, reading, you know, they come from, you know, the parliamentary, when you get to the concepts and stuff like that, Robert's Rule. Not that I've had that experience of sitting on a committee at a conference level. I haven't. It's only what I've kind of, bit of research, what I've done around it. But tradition 2 is the thread, the common thread, you know, and then you look at the autonomy, you look at the primary purpose, you know, you look at the other traditions, and they're telling you can't mix materialism with spirituality. You know, this message is a God-given program, and this message needs to be carried for the primary purpose. You know, and tradition 2 shows us how to keep the group in unity as a whole, to make sure that, as I keep reiterating on, you know, that the threshold is open, because some groups just fold. You know, but I know other groups, and you probably do as well, Paul, you know, that have been going for years because they've put God in the middle and they've adhered to this tradition. I'll leave it there.
You know, and I think it's really important, just before I get into that, you know, for any of our new listeners, they're probably wondering what on earth a group conscience is. A group conscience is basically folks that care about any particular group, and it's usually held minimum monthly. And as I say, it has a format, you know, old business, which is anything that's been tabled at the previous group conscience, new business, anything that's been presented to the group officers between the last group conscience and the current one, and then new business, anything that's brand new. And any member can make a motion, ask questions, and if a motion is seconded, it will be voted on, and if it's passed, it will be implemented and can be overturned at the next group conscience. So it's very, very simple. You know, you've made a lot of very good points, as always, Anthony. And, you know, I think the other point that's worthy of mention is that look, 12, this is all my opinion, by the way, 12-step recovery works best face-to-face. In my mind, there's no question about it, Anthony. However, Zoom recovery works very, very well as well. If you're willing to put the work in and practice this daily program of action outlined in the first 164 pages of the big book. and it works very, very well. But my one thing I would say, Anthony, is that many persons that are not familiar with face-to-face 12-step meetings or face-to-face group conscience, they simply do not know meeting etiquette and how things are done. For example, we get people fresh in off the streets into Zoom meetings. They don't understand that we don't ask questions. We don't sort of interrogate people about their shares or open the mic and start chatting about what they're sharing about. Nor do we just keep putting in our comments whilst people are sharing, because you just simply wouldn't do that in a face-to-face setting. And it's the same when these members come along to Zoom meetings and get a little bit familiar with meeting etiquette in ordinary meetings. They then come into a group conscience and they have absolutely no idea how it works, and so they need to learn the meeting etiquette and the format of a group conscience, I suppose it's a little bit like anarchists in society, Anthony, that just reject the established systems we have in place of local government, national government, local government, police, judiciary, etc. That is how it is, whether you like it or not. That's how it is, and we have things in place that our forefathers have put in place that work very, very well. The 12 steps and the 12 traditions, the 12 concepts work really, really well. And so, each group is a spiritual entity maintained by God. And I think the idea as well is that by the time persons come to study the traditions, they've already been through the process and they've got a little bit of well-being going on, Anthony. They've crossed that bridge to normal living, and they're back as reasonable, productive members of society. That care about others, and part of that is caring about the group, because they realize that the health of the group means the health of the individual. So we've got about 10 minutes left, and I'm just wanted to really hear what you have to say, Anthony, as regards the individual, the group, and how the two are symbiotic.
Okay, so from my opinion, I believe that the ego wants to separate, right? It wants to separate us. It wants to isolate us, right? And the pride, right? And then you look of what the unity or the recovery unity service, recovery service, recovery unity, whatever way you want to look at the triangle, right? But it's unity, service, recovery. When the newcomer comes in, when I first come in, and I knew that unity, there was power in unity, right? There was power where two or three are gathered, because I could hear it. I could hear a message of hope. I could hear a message of inspiration. You break hope down, hearing other people's experience, hold on, pain ends. I've just been in active drug addiction for nearly 40 years. I needed to know there was a solution, and the format, the meeting, and it creates equality, deflates the ego, lets everybody know we're on a level footing ground, no matter what walk of life you're from. Steer is the captain's table. Don't discriminate a race, a creed, or a colour. We're addicts and we suffer with a threefold illness. The main problem centers in the mind rather than the body. The body's as abnormal as the mind. The third layer to the issue is spiritual malady, what you've heard on our previous podcasts. And basically, these traditions, keep us in unity and keep anybody can have a vote. Anybody can put a proposal forward and it will be heard. Anybody, whether you're just joined the group and you've been there for 2 weeks, and there's a group conscience and you want to put something forward, you can put it forward. And then the group, for our group purpose, there's one ultimate authority, a loving God, as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders but trusted servants, they do not govern. And when you start looking at this, and these principles can be worked in your everyday life as well. I heard a woman, and she was about 35 years sober, and she turned around and said that I call a group conscience with my kids. To get to do a bit of brainstorming and have a look. It's amazing, and you can adhere it into the principles of a work ethic, a home ethic, a community ethic. And you start looking at the fellowship ethic of our group. Our primary purpose, is our primary purpose to make sure that the rooms are open, the doors are open for this message to be carried, to give hope and inspiration to the newcomer. You know, the person who's fortunate enough to get back through the door from a relapse, or a backslider who might have drifted through ego reconstruction and put something else in front of their recovery, or someone else who might have been drifting, that the door is open and they can hear this message, be it, you know, in a general way, what it used to be like, what happened and what it's like now. You know, and tradition too, you know, is with, you know, it's very pertinent that the group, there's one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. No matter how, you know, whether you're 30 years in, you know, 3 years in, or 3 weeks in, or 3 days in, we're on a level footing ground. You know, as I said, you know, it's the blind, half blind leading the blind leading the blind. You know, it's one beggar reaching out to the other. We've got a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. No one is bulletproof, you know, and so the only way I can overcome is by making a conscious decision on a daily basis to turn my will and my life over, trust God, clean house, and live in 10, 11, and 12 where I do live, you know, and I continue, I improve, and I practice, you know, and I do what I need to do. I meditate on the God I understand, on God. I pray, I take inventory, you know, I do a checklist. I touch base with a sponsor, you know, I work with others. I make sure I get to meetings to carry a message, whether it be a Zoom or a face-to-face, you know, and adhere to these principles where these traditions are set out, as Paul rightly said, for meeting etiquette. You know, and you know, your vocabulary, your terminology, you know, mine has totally changed, you know, through working this program and doing other stuff, obviously, to enlarge on my spiritual life, my education, you know, to enlarge on becoming a productive member in society as well. You know, I was of that opalus variety, as it talks about in the book. You know, so these traditions are very pertinent. Any newcomers listening, or anybody who don't understand these traditions, you know, I wholeheartedly suggest that you either get to 12 and 12 meetings, or you ask your sponsor to take you through them, or get into workshops, you know, where you can start learning, listening to these podcasts, what we're doing here, you know, and getting to learn. You know, the steps and traditions are very, very pertinent. And if you move up to a higher level, a committee level, the concepts as well. I'll hand that back over to you, Paul.
Beautiful. So I put up on the screen there some of the podcasts that we've got on this channel, Anthony, and we recorded one on Monday 2 days ago with Stephen of Utah, celebrating his 13 years of continuous sobriety. We are a program of complete abstinence. That's his second story. He's got another one which he recorded a couple of months ago. There he is. Look, that one there, you probably can't see the second row down. Oh, you can see it there, can't you? If I push it, it highlights it, doesn't it, for a minute? But
yeah.
Anyway, so there's lots of personal stories on there, and indeed, you and me are there. That's you there, Anthony. Look, that's your personal story. If anyone wants to hear more, I know I could listen to you for hours. And you and I recorded, as I recall, step 3. In fact, we recorded a brand new. We've got 2 on step 1 and 2 on step 2. That's you and me there, Anthony, recording another one on step 2, that one there in the middle. 2 months ago now. Goodness, time flies. So there's lots of resources, family. That's what I'm saying. There's lots and lots of resources. You know, the very best thing if you're struggling with drug addiction is to get through these steps with someone that's knowledgeable, has a home group, has been through this process, and has had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps. And knows the way around the literature and is willing to altruistically take you through this process so you can be liberated from the obsession to drink and drug yourselves to death. So there's a lot of help available. There's a lot of resources. As you can see, there's probably getting up for, I'm just trying to work that out, I don't know, 38 podcasts on this channel now. That's one you and I did 5 months ago, Anthony, on step 12 there, down at the bottom. Goodness, time flies. And then we did the step 3. I think there's even more than what this screen shows. I don't quite understand. Yeah, there is. This is just some of them. So there's lots of help available. Primarily, I would encourage anyone to get themselves along to a meeting where you can listen to people share their experience, strength, and hope. And I absolutely love what Anthony shared there, HOPE, helping what was it? Other people, hearing other people's experience is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And faith grows in the heart. Faith comes by hearing the message of recovery, that, we can lose the desire to use and find a new way to live. So, once again, it's been an absolute blessing, Anthony. Perhaps we could take a minute or two each to summarize things. So back to you.
Right, thank you, Paul. Yeah, so just recapping on what we've done on traditions. We started with tradition 1, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon CA unity. So the unity factor is very, very, very pertinent. So our common welfare should come first. So it's about the group, thinking about the group. And then in tradition 2, for our group purpose, there's one ultimate authority. A loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are what trusted servants say, do not govern. So that means that if you're new in, or you don't know about traditions, or when you're sitting in a group, you're entitled to a say as well. And there might be something that you disagree with, and you're entitled to vote against that as well. You get 3 options: to vote yes, to vote no, or just to abstain from a vote. That is your choice. I kind of go with my gut instincts. If I'm against something or for something, or if I can't make a decision in that moment, I'll abstain from making a vote. So anybody, join a group. I really encourage you to join a group, get to meetings, and become part of. Because it's nice to be a small part of a big whole, and that's a member of the 12-step program. And believe me, just keep putting one foot after another, dig your heels in, get your sponsors or get to groups to teach you traditions, because we learn the traditions so we can use them in the group, as well as in the fellowship as well, and adhere to the meeting etiquette and the way the meeting should be running due to the guidelines. So it's fantastic. The 12 and 12, they wanted to actually change that, but they voted against it. They said, no, it's helped so many people, as well as the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous. So our literature, is very, very prevalent and very pertinent, to us as individuals and to us as groups and members as well. I'll leave it there.
Thanks very much, Anthony. I suppose I just want to add a quick word about the wording of the steps, traditions, and concepts is very, very important. I'm working on steps 4 and 11 at the moment with a couple of persons, and our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. Now, to newcomers, people fresh in the door, it perhaps sometimes can seem like that, because they're completely unaware of the existing mature group conscience of any particular group. And so, at some point, someone has to try and explain the existing group conscience to them and meeting etiquette, because the spiritual atmosphere is really important. Conversely, everyone gets a chance to share. Of course, they do, but it's really important to bear in mind the whole, the greater good, and that we can be of maximum benefit to our fellows and people that come in full of chaos and carnage and confusion. I mean, ultimately, sobriety, freedom from alcoholism, deliverance from darkness, from drunkenness, from drug addiction is the name of the game. We deal with alcoholism, stroke addiction in these rooms very, very well, Anthony, don't we? We have a solution. We know how it works. It's available to anyone, whatever they believe, whatever they've been using. We're not interested what age, colour, creed, religion, anything like that. We deal with recovery in these rooms. The doctor's surgery is over there, the psychiatrist is over there, the church is over there. We deal with sobriety, with recovery, and with abstinence. And so if you're listening to this and you're struggling with drug addiction, please get yourself along to a meeting. There are web addresses at the top of that page. If you go to those addresses, you'll find about online meetings information, and also face-to-face meetings information. There are meetings on the screen there at the top left underneath the pink box, the Breakfast Club. These are UK times, although anyone from around the planet is welcome to attend these meetings. Breakfast Club is on every morning at 7:30. Great Gratitude every morning at 9:30. Pop-up Recovery every morning 10:30. Weekend Recovery is on at 2 p.m. every day, 8 p.m. every day, and over at the top right, Daily Reprieve every night at 9:30. Reaching Out every night at 11, and Tazana every night at midnight. So that's 8 meetings that are on every single day, Anthony. So people can get a lot of help and find freedom from the darkness of drug addiction. You know, there is a way out, there is hope. So come along to a meeting and get involved and reach out, you know, and you'll be amazed how much support and help there is. So look, that brings us to the end of today's broadcast. And once again, you know, it's been wonderful to hear you share your words of wisdom, Anthony. So I want to thank you for your participation today.
Yes, and thank you as well, Paul. And yeah, thank God that he's let us be a maximum service to him, so we can be a maximum service to others. And that happens when we start putting this action in, you know. And yeah, thank God for that. I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. Okay, family, stay safe, stay strong, and stay connected. Until next time.